Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Coffee with Ashish. Happy New Year to start off with. I'm so glad you got all join us. We're going to talk about how to become a cloud security architect in 2021. I know a lot of you reached out to me and well, your wish has come true. Surprisingly, totally unplanned, but it worked out. So I'm not going to complain about it. And I have an amazing guest over here to basically help us get through this interesting world of cloud security architecture and cloud security architect. But I'm going to start off with the obvious one. So that's the website. That's where the stuff gets online after we finish the episode. And if you have any questions or want to reach out for any topic that you want us to cover, that's where you would go. So without further ado, let me put get the vibe going. So I've got this. All right. I need to more wait for a moment before it comes up. Hey, Sriya, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Good. Totally need to wait for the vibe to start.
Yeah.
Sorry, we totally kept going with it, but I kind of feel like I should listen to the whole song. But thank you for recommending the song and thank you for coming to the show. Really awesome to have you on the show here. I'm super excited. Happy New Year, by the way, first of all.
Happy New Year. Hope it's starting out great for everyone.
Yeah, hopefully it's safe. Well, I don't know. I'm not going to go into our New Year's Eve fireworks got canceled because of obvious things, but I'm not going to go into too much details about it. But I do want to say cheers. Welcome to the show.
Cheers. Thank you. Really excited to be here.
Awesome. We've got a few people coming online as well. Hey, Vineet. Happy New Year. And Happy New Year to Gerald as well. So a few folks coming online. I'm going to start with the obvious one for people who may not have, like you and I spoke about the whole cloud security architecture piece last year. And for people who may not have heard from you before, how did you get into the space? What was your path into it, out of curiosity? Where are you based out of?
So right now I work as a cloud security architect for United Airlines in Chicago. And I've spent like a good bit of my career with United, but I kind of bounced around to a couple different industries, a couple different companies within my career. And, for me at least, for the majority of my career, really, I've kind of lived in this cloud security world. I like to say that like I'm cloud native, right? Because I never really, I know.
Yep, that's a good one.
Yeah, so like in college, I kind of majored in like information decision sciences. So I kind of had this like business side, and then I also learned a little bit about technology, a little bit about data. And while I was doing that, I was working as a web developer for my school. So I got like a lot of those like web fundamentals. What does development look like? And when you're working with other people and not just on like personal projects, right? At that time I was, in college. So I did that for a little bit. I worked in help desk for a startup for a little bit. So I kind of dipped my feet inside like the identity and access management space, Office 365, and really, just kind of like got a good foundation, I think, of IT before I started at United, which was my first internship.
Right.
At that time, I had no idea of what cybersecurity was. I was really like, I'm going to be a project manager, and, that's going to be really cool. And my options were to be a project management intern within a couple different spaces. And cybersecurity at that time was like really cool. And it was very hot, right? And it is.
Yeah.
So that's where I decided I wanted to be. I was there for a summer and I really liked it, and I really liked security especially. So I wanted to get deeper. So the next summer I came back, still an intern, but this time I was in like the AppSec space because I already had this like basic web fundamental, right? Like I knew what code meant, I knew how to code. So in the AppSec space, I was like learning a lot about like these security fundamentals, right? Like what does it mean to secure code? What factors are managed by this application and what factors are managed beyond that, right? So when I did that, I did that for a little while. And then I decided to join this team when I was joining United full time. that was
Yep.
more in the architecture space. So at the time, they called it the Security Advisory Organization. So
Right.
all of the projects came into my team, and like all of the more senior architects, like I was just kind of like reviewing the projects in advance to know what questions like the architects would be asking. So we can kind of speed this process along, right? So I worked
Right.
really closely with a lot of architects. And around that time, we were noticing that there was a lot of cloud-specific projects, and we didn't really have any competency within the security organization in cloud. So with the help of some outside consultants and like more senior architects who were getting trained on the cloud, I kind of joined that team as well. So now we have this cloud security organization, and I was one of the first members, right? Like it's
Right.
so I was learning about the cloud realistically, at the time when I was just learning about security as well. So that's why I call myself cloud native.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I when I started on this cloud security team, I was doing, it was at United. And then I was like, I've spent realistically my entire life in Chicago. So I was like,
Yep.
I want to go out, see more stuff. And I joined this financial company in New York, doing again cloud security, but looking at it from a financial perspective. So, question like we were talking about before, like compliance was a big driver. Tying everything back to being compliant, all that
Yep.
kind of stuff. And after doing that for a little bit, I moved into again a more consumer-facing company. So I was working at like a consumer goods company, doing again cloud security, and
Yep.
all circled back, and I'm back at United.
Well, clearly you love them enough to come back again. But I think it's really interesting
Yeah.
what you mentioned. So it sounded like you probably started when the whole because I think my understanding is when cloud security kind of started, people didn't really know what to call it. It was just like, I guess we're doing security in AWS or security in Azure, because there was no Google Cloud back then. But it's also fascinating to know that you've had experience in that space in different industries, because I think that's definitely valuable. And we would love to dig deeper into it. But I wanted to start with, because everyone has a different definition of cloud security. What's your definition
Mhm.
of cloud security?
Yeah. So I think when I think about cloud security, I really think about like our shared responsibilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're looking on-prem, we're realistically responsible for everything. So everyone kind of has their own role. They're looking at the infrastructure, they're looking at the app. Inside the cloud, we might not be responsible for every single facet of the infrastructure. And I know you've talked about this a lot on your podcast already. When we need to understand as security professionals, what are we responsible for when it's infrastructure as a service versus a platform as a service versus just like, a pure SaaS application, which, in some companies, they're like, yeah, this is cloud. So, you cloud security people, you manage SaaS as well, right?
Yeah.
So, having that basic understanding, it really helps know, what am I supposed to be looking at when I'm thinking about this particular cloud application?
Yeah. And to your
And
point,
then,
sorry, go on.
yeah,
No, no,
sorry.
go on.
Yeah, so I mean, like, what I was going to say is that I think, not just, the shared responsibility between like the cloud service provider and the customer, but it's also shared responsibility between the teams within your company, right? Like, security, I think when we're looking at the cloud, isn't so siloed inside the security organization. Your app
Yeah.
team might be taking a facet of that, so they're going to be running their own code scans, and they're going to get an output, and you're going to be there to help them. But, at the end of the day, like, they're responsible for securing their code. And same with this infrastructure people, same with the infrastructure side, right? Like, we're going to
Yeah.
be there. We're going to help you design it. We're going to, we're going to work with you every step of the way. But at the end of the day, the infrastructure is your responsibility. And yeah.
Yeah. And to your point, it's worthwhile calling out, when you say shared responsibility, it's probably what is one of the most confusing thing about the cloud as well, where people kind of still wonder, oh, where does my responsibility finish, and where does the responsibility of the cloud service provider start? Do you kind of have like a small, like what's a almost simple example that you can share with some of the audience members who may not even know what shared responsibility is?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, the easiest way to look at it is when you're looking at like a SaaS product, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in a SaaS product, realistically, what you are responsible for, if it's true SaaS, is one, the data that's going into that environment, and two, who are you giving access to your environment, right? That's all that you have the ability to configure. So that's what you're going to look at, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the
Agreed.
SaaS provider will take everything else, right? They're going to be responsible for, the underlying hardware. Like, they're going to be responsible for the security of their code because you didn't design it. You don't know what's going on there. So, and at the end of the day, like if something bad happens, it's on them. It's their responsibility.
Yep. And that's pretty good. And it's really interesting. So out of curiosity, what does a day in a cloud security architect role look like then?
So I think when we look at my role, and I try to, like when we look at my calendar, right? I think most of my day is just reviewing something, right? So I talked a lot about how, like, at the end of the day, the app team is responsible for securing their code, right? But I'm responsible for knowing that this tool is going to review their code correctly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm responsible for these underlying tools that we're using to secure the cloud, and setting the correct controls and monitoring those controls. And I'm also responsible for reviewing like applications and new design decisions and working with teams to make the correct decision.
All right. So your day probably would have a lot of design reviews of projects being deployed, or maybe even decisions being made, which are changes in the existing design in the way it works or how it functions. Would that be accurate?
Yeah. So if, when we're looking, I like to kind of divide it into like an application and infrastructure, like the actual underlying infrastructure. So, especially if there's like a big infrastructure change being made, like my team is definitely looped in, right? Because infrastructure people are going to be looking at, like, can this data get to this location? They're not going to be looking at, like, is it going to get there securely?
Yep. And to your point, is it worthwhile calling out that between the different industries, it was similar in the context that I guess the architecture reviews are more around. Actually, maybe architecture reviews in cloud, are they similar in different industries, or are they like different kinds of days in a different industry? I guess that's kind of where I'm going with this.
Yeah. So I think at the basic level, right, where architecture reviews are the same, right? We're gonna want to know, what data is going to be in this. Are we what services are we using? What access levels do those services have? Right? So at that fundamental stage, like, yes, of course, we're going to be looking at the same things. I think it's just more of a difference in, what level of control are we applying?
Right. And I think there's a question from Vineet as well. As a security architect, would you focus more on the GRC side?
It's definitely something that you need to know, right? So if we have, like, let's say PCI data, so credit card information, we need to know that, credit card information can't be exposed, right? Mm-hmm. So what controls do I need to make sure that that's not going to that data is protected, right? So it's definitely important to know what controls are necessary for what type of data, but I think we're looking at my level, we're more looking at, the actual specific controls and not, like, what data are you using?
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile calling out because different organizations have different structures for it as well. Because to your point, I guess there might be roles in a smaller organization where if it's a startup where everyone's doing everything as well. So in those kind of scenarios, maybe an architect would not just look at, I guess, architecture design, but also maybe looking at compliance and GRC as well, because I guess that's what the role demands. But I think it's worthwhile calling out. Would you say it's different depending on the scale of the organization that you're, I guess, currently working with?
Yeah, definitely, right. at least in my team, we're trying to kind of make teams take responsibility of what they are responsible for, right? So instead of having everything go through the cloud security organization, we want to make it more holistic again. We want to make sure that, all those teams that are saying that they're like, yeah, like we're the data people, we're going to make sure that your data is protected. We want to make sure that, they understand what it means to be in the cloud. So
Yeah.
actually,
and I think
yeah.
it's worthwhile. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
I think, I didn't really hit on this before, but I think a lot of my day also is translating what is different in the cloud versus on-prem to teams that aren't necessarily in the cloud day to day.
Yep. And I think to your point, it's really interesting about translation is so difficult sometimes, especially when you're coming with the baggage of the on-premise already. There's a follow-up question from Vinny about the CCM controls, which is the cloud control matrix controls for reference. Oh, sorry, I thought I was clicking on it. Is that something that you guys use quite often, or is it more you have your own, I guess, unless you have your own matrix that you refer for reviewing architecture?
So I mean, like this, for us, that was a great fundamental. As our environment gets more complex, those controls may not necessarily be relevant when we're looking at one specific application. So a big effort that we have right now is creating more controls that are controls and, kind of like base questions that we're asking that are relevant to applications that are going to be sitting on our environment, right? So basic things, maybe it's something like IAM, right? Just like getting access into the environment. These frameworks might give you a specific method, but that might not always translate to, an enterprise and a large enterprise environment.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point about large enterprise, because I think you were aware of the CIS benchmark that's being thrown around as well. I always use the AWS one as an example, where it's really great if you only have one AWS account, but these days, I don't know of any company which only has one AWS account. And that CIS benchmark was written with the intent of having one AWS account. So to your point about the enterprise and that scale, that's technically not applicable at that point, because then you're making a call whether, hey, am I going to ignore CIS and only take on the ones that I feel are relevant for me, which is probably a good segue into, I guess, the kind of skills that you would require in such a role, maybe both soft skills as well as technical skills. What do you recommend for, say, someone like Vineet or others who may be looking at getting into this kind of a space? And you might have IT experience or you may not have IT experience. What do you reckon? There you go. Someone's like, what certificate to start? What next year? Please answer. Someone's already asked this. Perfect, man. I techie love. That's kind of where we are going with this. What do you reckon? Let's start with the soft skills, and then we'll come back to the certificate part.
Sure. Yeah. So from a soft skills perspective, we kind of talked about this before, right? Being able to communicate, I think, is 100% so necessary when, at least in like my environment, where we're trying to communicate, hey, like this is how it works in the cloud. This is how you might do it on-prem. And this is why this works in the cloud, right? So being able to communicate that and make sure that your partners are aware of, what's changing when they're not inside a specific environment day to day is incredibly important to stay on the same page and to ensure that the speed of business is where it should be. As we know, security ends up being such a bottleneck, and it's ultimately what we're trying to prevent, right? Cloud allows us to be so fast, and we just want to make sure that, we're not being kind of like stuck with old security methodology when we could do better.
Yep. And to your point about, so great communication skills, or at least translating on-premise to cloud as well, to what you were saying earlier, because sometimes you don't want to be talking about the technical details, just about translating what's used to be effective in on-premise, but may not be the same in a cloud environment. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the number one skill that I use day to day.
Perfect. And I definitely want to get into the technical skills as well. Maybe I think we can start with the question from Naneka, which is, I hope I pronounced his name right. As a security architect providing security advisor to the engineering team, do you consider the role as a technical role?
Yeah, I would, right? Because you still need to understand what the engineering is doing to even give them guidance, right? We can look at all of these, frameworks and say like, yeah, this is how it should be, but you need to understand in context and to do that, you need to know the underlying technology.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Great answer. And I'm gonna come back to the certificate question, but
Mhm.
is there, apart from the certification, I'd love for you to jump in and answer that as well. But any specific technical skills people should be looking at, and then we can go into the certificate question.
Yeah, so I think it's super helpful to have at least a basic understanding of Python, how
Mm-hmm.
APIs work, um, kind of, like how do you read JSON or YAML and, CloudFormation, right? At least when we're looking at the AWS world. Um, when we understand that, and then also we understand like the base underlying services within AWS, I think we're able to be a lot more powerful as security people,
Yeah.
instead of just looking at these basic compliance things. Like, yeah, I know I need to do this, but how do I make that happen?
Yep. And I think to your point, is it worthwhile calling out that it's always misunderstood that people might think that getting a certificate is equivalent to an experience? I feel, would you say having a certificate is a great start, or it's a great way to get an introduction into what that concept may be in that, I guess, cloud service provider, but you still need to kind of go out and have a look at, okay, what else I could be doing? What's a real life example that I can go for? Would that be accurate?
Yeah, definitely. I think certification is really great when you don't know anything, right? When you
Yep.
don't know your fundamentals, like a certification really gives you that structure that you need to get an understanding. And that really worked the same for me, right? When I was like, just starting out in my career and we were starting this cloud team, the first thing I went out and did was I got my architect certification, and I got the security certification. So, I understood at the AWS level what is possible, what can we do, right? Then, when you have that base knowledge, and then you're looking at your enterprise, and you're taking like a step back, you can
Yep.
say, hey, I don't need CloudWatch because I already have Splunk.
Yep.
So I just need to
Yep.
get my Cloud Trail data in the Splunk.
Oh, actually, so that's a great point. So if you're doing certification, that at least gives you what's possible in a cloud provider. And
Mm-hmm.
then depending on the company you're working with, you can make an informed decision for, do I want to use this, or do I already have something that I can use from beforehand?
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you're leveraging your enterprise capabilities as much as possible. So you're able to centralize on the team. You're able to centralize all of this knowledge in the teams that have that fundamental knowledge, right? I'm a cloud
Yeah.
security architect, but I'm not a great incident responder. I wouldn't say that's
Yeah.
my core competency. I understand what they do, but I'm not going to go sit
Hmm.
there and look at these logs all day to understand if, and like, create alerts and like all that kind of stuff, right? Like I'm not an incident responder. Like that's not where my background is. So
Yeah.
to say that I
Yeah.
can
And
do
I
it
think,
better, right?
yeah, and I think it's worthwhile calling out because depending on the organization, I think we were touching on this earlier as well. To your point, a larger organization would have a person for an incident response. They would have people who are generating alerts. Obviously the scale of work is so large. That's why you have specific people for specific role as well. Where cloud security architect is probably reviewing a lot more designs and how does something in on-premise translate into the cloud world. I've got another question from Achakila, which was around the AWS security exam. I think
Hmm.
you said you've given your exam already.
Yeah.
Um, did you do a CCSP as well, or have you considered doing it? I think Itechie Love would love to know about that as well.
Sure. So I'm currently studying for my CCSP. I think what's interesting there is, for the AWS security cert, I don't think you really need to have any sort of like work history, right? For your CCSP, you
Yeah.
do. That's an expectation.
Yeah.
So, I think the AWS cert is definitely something that you should do, especially if you're planning on working in AWS. The CCSP, I think, takes a more theoretical look and kind of abstracts your cloud provider. You're not going as technical. You're really looking at the theory behind cloud security, which 100% you should know. To be but to be immediately effective in your job, I think it's good to have this like the technical foundation that the AWS security cert would give you.
I think especially in the cloud world, I feel like most of the conversation you would have, I think you touched upon AWS CloudWatch just earlier. For someone who has just looking at my dog, it's like right next to me barking. It's like I saw someone outside. No, so what I was going to say was for someone who probably hasn't done any certification, probably would not know what AWS CloudWatch is. They might just like, I guess it's a service, and I think you can cover that gap and come across as more experienced or at least have some knowledge in it. So just to get some, I guess, no, I don't want to use the word respect, but more, well, I can't think of
Yeah,
another word. Just become
to
knowledgeable,
speak
I guess.
yeah, to speak
Yeah.
authoritatively, right? Especially as a cloud security architect, right? You should know
Yes.
what
Yes. I've got a question from Kanishk as well. The question is, I think they're related. How is the architecture different when working with multi-cloud? But there's another one. Is it necessary to know both Azure and AWS? You can take either ways, however you want to, but I think both of them are interesting. Do we need to know both?
I mean, I don't think it hurts you to have an understanding of all of your clouds, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
you'll learn that they're all very similar, right? At the fundamental level, you're going to have your VMs. If you call it an EC2, it's AWS, but it's still a VM, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
having the fundamentals down, is definitely super helpful. Is it necessary to be super deep, or can you even be super deep, as we talked before?
Yep.
Um,
Yep. That's a
that's
hard one. That because I
yeah,
think to give people some context, Shreya and I were talking about this just before about the whole multi-cloud concept, and for people who have been keeping track on AWS reInvent, which was last month, and I think they have another batch of content coming later this month as well. They had about, I think, 300, 400 releases just in December. To imagine yourself being on top of all the 300 or 400 updates that they've done. And then again in January when they do more updates, and then that across Azure or Google Cloud, it's not practical. So, I mean, I can share my personal opinion on this if you don't mind. Or what I would
yeah,
normally say is, based on the organization that you would work with, you would realize that either focusing on AWS or Azure, but kind of what Sriya said, if you focus on the foundational pieces, like if you look at identity management or something about network access, how is that being managed, you would be able to map that skill to each of the cloud service providers. It's just where, like, instead of AWS CloudWatch, it would be Azure Monitor or Google Cloud Monitoring. Like, it would be, the names may differ, but the function would be the same. Would that be a great way, or I guess another a way to say this?
yeah. No, that was great. It's exactly what I was
Perfect.
trying to say.
Perfect. I've got another question for Ganesh. Curtis, certification lasts for 2 to 3 years. So what do we do after that? I guess make sure you get some experience, but I'll let you answer.
Yeah. Well, so I think certification really helps you get your foot in the door, right? So you can show someone that theoretically, yeah, I know all of this, even if I haven't had even if I haven't done like 5 years inside an enterprise. I understand AWS.
Hmm.
So within those 2 to 3 years, hopefully, you're getting a job, maybe as an associate architect or as an engineer where you're going to be able to get your hands on work. And then, for me at least, renewing my certification helps me because, it helps me stay on top of everything that I need to know and make sure that I'm not missing anything that AWS is saying, hey, like to be a security person, you need to understand this inside AWS, right? They're literally telling you that in that certification.
Yeah.
So I like to renew mine. some people don't feel the same way. I think it'll be up to you.
I'm definitely on the camp that I haven't renewed my certificate, so I can give you my side of the story. So I got my job and then I did my certification. So to Shriya's point, you might feel that once you start getting enough experience, the certificate may not be important, but it's definitely a great way to be up to date on having, I guess, an uplifting view on, okay, what's the updated services in AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, because you might be restricted to a limited number of services in your organization. So to Shreya's point, you might only work with CloudWatch, or you might only work with certain services in your organization, but there might be 200 other services which you may have never heard of, but they might be security related. So at that point, if you go back and renew your security certificate, you might get insight into what those other services are, which you may probably bring back into your organization, and your boss might love you for that, maybe even give you a promotion for that.
Yep.
I've got another question for Naneka, a couple of questions. For example, layered protection and secure SDLC. Do you need to be technical and have an operational understanding of the controls to give guidance?
I think generally it never hurts to be technical and to understand how operations will work, what type of burden you're going to be putting on operations when you're creating any sort of, architecture, right? So, sorry, I'm trying to take in this question, right?
No, this is gonna be fine, and I think it's definitely I think you've kind of went in the right direction as well, because it's definitely something you need to have an understanding of. Otherwise, you can't even talk to them about what they're trying to do as well, right? So they might ask you a cloud, how do you do this in cloud, and you kind of have to translate that at that point. But yeah, I think you've answered the question though. I was gonna bring up another one, which is from Paul, which is, I'm pretty sure you would love this as well, because it's a long one, but I'm going to quickly summarize it. Basically, what that means is not all services are mature enough in AWS. So just because there is a service in AWS or Azure or Google Cloud doesn't necessarily mean that they are ready to be consumed. And obviously, being Amazon or Azure or Google Cloud, they would recommend you would use that service, but a lot of services may be in beta. Have you experienced that, by the way, Sriya? That they say that use a service, but the service is not mature enough to be used in an organization?
Yeah, definitely. And I think as a security architect, that's your job to understand, right? Like you need to understand, my organization needs this. The AWS is giving me this service, but it's only going to cover, maybe 80%, right? Is 80%, can I live with 80%? Maybe yes, right? Or, I can't live with 80%, and I need to look outside. I need to do research. I need to understand, maybe there's other tools that are available on the marketplace. So, and I need to consume those tools. So it's always a question of, understanding your organization, and, maybe, this underbaked tool is enough for you because you're a startup.
Yep. I'm going to move on from the live comment questions. So we'll come back to them after. Just be mindful of the time as well. So sure. The next, because we were talking, I'm going to start off where we left off, where we spoke about the soft skills and technical skills. If you're already an on-premise security architect, is there a specific skill that you need to have to move into a cloud space so you can transition, or?
Yeah. So I think, I'm just going to kind of hammer on this all hour, right? You need to know your fundamentals in the cloud, right? So as an on-premise security architect, in my experience, a lot of the time we're going to be looking at maybe the perimeter, right? And we're going to say, hey, if my perimeter is really strong, I'm going to trust a lot of the things that are inside my environment. In the cloud, you have a little bit of a shifting perspective, right? A lot of everything, actually everything in the cloud is managed by IAM. I need to have a great understanding of IAM and how I'm permissioning and giving a certain service access to a different service, or giving a human access to certain services. Do I give them console access, or just CLI, having, I think, actually, let me scratch that whole thing. You need to know IAM.
It's a very complex subject as well. It's funny.
Yeah.
I don't want to do a shameless plug, but I started this thing called Cloud Security Academy, and the first course that we have there is just that. It's just foundational pieces, and it just covers IAM. I mean, simple to you and I, it would be some simple things, right? Or network access to cloud. Is it bi-directional, or is it like access to certain resources? IAM. What does a firewall equivalent look like in a cloud world? Is it security groups or something else? And trying to do that between Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud. That's kind of what the Cloud Security Academy piece focused on. I think there is it's definitely something that translates really well into a cloud environment, especially if you've been an on-premise kind of environment security architect to begin with. You just need to your point earlier, you just need to map it to the right people, or sorry, not right people, right controls or right parameters that you need to work with. It's just a different landscape for the same challenges.
Yeah. No, that's very cool.
What about challenges in I guess we spoke about the industry piece earlier, and you've had different experiences in different roles as well, and it's really interesting. Actually, I see a couple of questions over here, which I'm going to get into. So I would love your patience as well as Kanish, your patience as well. But the question that I wanted to find out about, if you're a junior, if you have not had any experience before, and kind of like what you were doing with your internship, what do you recommend? What can they do to get into this cloud security space? Maybe even a cloud security architect role, if there's a junior cloud security architect role out there.
Yeah. So number one, I think it's especially to get to the architect level, it's good to have at least a base understanding of all areas within security, right? You want to know, what is AppSec doing? What is IAM doing? What does vulnerability management mean? Those basic fundamentals. And then to move into the cloud world, at least for me, what helped me was getting my certifications, understanding cloud. A lot of, maybe for me, it was even better than, more senior members of my organization, because cloud was new. And, taking all of that knowledge and being able to, then kind of move into the cloud space, I think would make a lot easier, especially if you have those certifications, right? I think certifications definitely have a place, especially at a junior role.
Yeah, especially even now, funny enough, even though AWS and Azure, all these people have been there for almost 6+ years, but they all still have relevant certificate, because a lot of the industry is still transitioning into cloud, surprisingly. And surprisingly, as in with the Cloud Security podcast is also near or so, like everything is like it's still in the beginning stages, to your point. So there might be a lot of people who may have a lot of experience, but just don't have that translation into the cloud world. So to your point, certificate is definitely great at that point. So from a junior perspective, so you're recommending get some IT experience, so you have some basic fundamental understanding, and then get a certificate so you understand how that maps into AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, wherever they want to go, I guess.
Yeah. And then I think, especially at a junior person, having the softer skills, right? Being able to ask your management, hey, this is something that I'm interested in, and this is where I want my career to go. You can never discount that. Making sure that, people know that you want to do this.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting to your point about sometimes the simplest thing you can do is ask someone. Like you can ask people, you can ask you folks over there, can ask Sriya, ask me, ask other people who are here. I think cybersecurity is a very welcoming industry. Well, at least the ones that I've dealt with, fortunately, over the 10 years that I've been working in this. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Anyone who's listening to this and feels that, I need some direction. I think it's just as simple as sometimes asking people what's the right thing to do. You may or may not like the answer, but at least you have an answer.
Yeah, definitely.
I was going to ask, in terms of the industry as well, I know you yourself kind of dabbed into a couple that you spoke, actually 3 you spoke about earlier. Is there always a good thing? is it a good thing to have experience from different industries and bring them, or do you kind of have that thought where, oh, you should focus on one, that way you become like a specialized architect for a certain field, or do you like a variation or a diversity?
For me, I like having a diversity. I think it's really cool to understand how things are done in different environments, and for me, that's really fun. And it's definitely helped me in my career, right? Like, look, I worked at a couple different organizations at different stages in their cloud journey. So, working in a more senior organization, I can go to the more junior organization and say, hey, like, I've seen it done, and this is how they did it. And I might have some things to change now, knowing that they did something this way, and I can see there's problems, so now we can fix it. But I don't think you necessarily need to take your industry rotational, right?
yeah, and I think the only was thanks, Vineet. So by the way, Vineet is doing my course as well, so he's from that. So I'm glad he's finding that valuable. The thing that I wanted to call out over here as well is diversity is so important in general, that I think, to your point, having the same foundational pieces apply to different industries. I think you've done a great job. So I'm glad you could share that experience with us as well. But I'm gonna quickly touch on some of these questions. I'm happy to kind of answer some of these, because some of them are totally out of scope for this conversation. Like the one, sorry, I can't answer this one, where it's about, I think we have an episode on the containers in cloud. Happy to answer this separately out of this context. I don't think the topic covers containers in cloud, but we definitely have a few episodes on it. But happy to answer that outside of this context. There's one. Do you have an answer for this?
Yeah.
Cloud security.
Yeah. So at least in my organization, what we're seeing is that the architects are really designing the environment, and then we might be looking at specifically like in code, like like, do we see any like sort of like security issues? In DevSecOps, they're a little more tightly integrated with our app teams. So they might be actually implementing a lot of the security that we might be saying, hey, here are controls and here's how you might do it. But they're the ones who are actually like in the console or in the CLI and actually physically doing that work.
Sweet. And also, sorry, for the context of the audio people who might be listening on the audio, the question is, can a cloud security architect and DevSecOps architect, how do they differ? Can a person be both in the same role? Or can a person be both in the same role?
I think depending on the size of your organization, you might.
You might be doing everything, I guess.
Yeah.
Morning, Mark. Mark's here as well. There's another question that came in from Naneka. I don't think anyone can answer that but it's a very broad question to go for. Like, I don't know if you want to comment on this specifically, if there are general areas that Nanika can focus on, but the question is more, is there a doc you can share for us to leverage on mapping the on-premise to cloud technology? So like, very open question, but I'll let you answer if you have any specific areas that you kind of ask people to go into.
That's a hard one. When I'm thinking about like actual technologies, there's no document, right? But if you're looking at logging, hey, AWS logs everything in CloudTrail, right? And you can store it in S3 and use I think it's Athena to view those logs, or you could be more advanced, right? And you could maybe send your logs to an Elk stack and use Kibana to view your logs, or you could completely take them off of AWS and put them in like a third-party provider and view your logs there and generate your alerts there, right? So, I think AWS already gives you those like general like service categories, and if you're looking at your on-prem, you can kind of see where that aligns.
Yeah, perfect. So it's gonna go through some of these questions. Just Comptia Security. Have you done Comptia Security Plus?
No, I haven't, and I can't speak to it. But again, like what I'll always say is, one, learning never hurts. Learn more, learn as much as you can. And, I think the Security Plus is like one of those more like fundamental courses on your basic security knowledge. So yes, definitely, having basic security knowledge is helpful.
My personal opinion on if you don't mind, if I share something about
Oh
Security
yeah,
Plus,
for
is
sure.
that if you haven't had any experience in security before, and especially if you're a junior person, I think it's a great way to at least get some fundamentals, but that doesn't necessarily would translate into cloud, just because Security Plus is more, these are the security concepts. And then to Shriya's point, you might go into a certification to see, oh, how does AWS do security, or how does Azure do security? Then you can map that. Okay, then you can start mapping that onto, oh, okay, so I know Security Plus, which has given me fundamentals of security. Then I've got AWS certification, which has given me information about AWS. How do I combine that to use into a cloud environment? It's almost like a 3-step process at that point. But yeah, it's definitely interesting, especially if you have never had security experience. I think I've heard good things. I personally haven't done it, but I've heard good things about, in terms of exactly what Triya said. It's a great fundamental piece to go with to get an understanding of what security is about.
Yeah. And for Kanishk especially, I think maybe CCSP might be helpful, because you can still do the training and you can learn. You're not going to have your certificate badge at the end of that, or you might get, I think, the associate.
Yeah.
And that might bridge the gap a little closer for you. So
you recommend CCSP for fundamentals as well for cloud?
Yeah, I think so. It's pretty theoretical. So you're still getting, those like the theoretical base. But again, it's not going to map you back to your specific services, with your cloud provider.
In cloud.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think Vineet's done it as well. He said he did. It's not totally focused in cloud, but it covers every domain of cybersecurity. So I guess, Kanishk, for you, the step seems to be, if you've done Security Plus, some kind of an Amazon certificate to have an understanding of Amazon services, or Azure service if you want to do Azure, Google Cloud, whatever cloud provider you want to choose, and then CCSP. And then you get, would that be a good set? It's a lot of learning. Hopefully enjoy it, man.
Yeah.
But unfortunately or fortunately, I think all of us are in technology because we get to learn everything every day. There's something new coming out every day. So I think it's like I take it as a positive thing. So
yeah,
that was great. I've got 2 more questions. Is there a myth in cloud security that you hear about quite a bit?
I think the one that bothers me the most is the notion.
I'm going to use that question next time.
Yeah, I mean, like it's the notion that the cloud is inherently less secure, right? I'm sure we've all heard it. Like, oh, like you're putting that data in the cloud. Like, can you do that?
Yeah. Yep. It's funny. It's funny. Like, I think if I were to do a survey on the last season of Cloud Security Podcast, as well as the folks who did the Cloud Security Academy course with us as well, they all mentioned the fact that it's really funny that that myth hasn't gone. In 7 years, people still think cloud isn't secure. It's not the responsibility of the person that they haven't done their job correctly in cloud. It's the cloud's fault. I'm like, yeah. So if it's on-premise, so it's on-premises fault. But it's a great answer. I've got a follow-up question to that. What are people not talking enough about in cloud security that you think they should hear about?
Yeah, I like, at least for me, I think the one thing that I really want people to know is that cloud security is, it's so much more holistic than I think on-prem is, because everyone, because of the way cloud is managed, because it's API driven, because everything is managed by access, it's such a shared responsibility, right? Like, never is cloud security the only one responsible for security. So I think we should be talking more about, when we're looking at organizational structure, how can we make sure that that notion that cloud security is everyone's responsibility is reflected, right? I don't want it to be that if there's a security question in the cloud, we go to the cloud security team. I think we should have like a central cloud team that manages cloud security infrastructure, data, like DevSecOps, right? And having that center of excellence to create that, that holistic idea and to manage security holistically instead of having all this finger pointing of like, your roles and responsibilities and your racing HSCs and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
which is,
I think,
yeah, but it's a big ask, it's a pipe dream.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah, that's right. But I think it's funny. I think we had a guest from Atlassian in my first few episodes, and they've kind of gone down that path where I think it's called Cloud Center of Excellence, or COE. They basically, these are the folks, and obviously to your point, it's different structure for different people, because that's a tech product company, that's not an enterprise. Well, enterprise is enterprise loosely speaking, but they've went down the path of center of excellence. A lot of other people did as well, which is exactly what you just said, where it should not be treated differently to what your regular environment is. I guess that's kind of where it kind of gets lost, or sometimes it should be, depending on whether you're on multiple cloud providers as well. So it's a great advice. Hopefully people get to that as well. I've got a few more people coming in. Charles is going to focus on cloud incident response. Oh, my favorite topic.
Yeah.
It's like that's a great topic to focus on, Charles. Definitely reach out if you need any information with that. I've got a question from Marcel about what certification. I think, Marcel, we've covered this already. So if you want to, because he just joined in, I think. So if you want to go back and just rewind, you will probably get to it in a few minutes. And because the edges are so fluffy, Mark being the funny person. I've got one question from Kanish here for you. What got you to move into cloud security from web development?
For me, it was kind of just, I worked in web development for a while and I was looking for something new and exciting.
Oh, of
and
course. Cybersecurity is exciting, people, just saying. Like...
Yeah, and it was all happenstance for me, and cloud security, I think, kind of fulfills that desire for new and exciting because it's new and exciting every day.
Yeah, I think that's why we're all on technology as well. But that was pretty much most of the questions that I had. I've got 3 questions, which are the fun question part. This is a great part of the interview where the audience gets to know you a bit more as well. Just 3 basic questions. What do you spend most time on when you're not working on cloud or technology?
Yeah, well, we've talked about this a little bit.
I'm ready to say that.
I'm a yoga teacher, instructor, and I love practicing yoga, and I attempted at creating like a yoga tutorial on YouTube, but we'll see if I'm going to expand it.
Yes, I am so glad you mentioned it. So now everyone can peer pressure you into starting that YouTube channel with your yoga message, because I think working from home has definitely given a lot of people backaches. So yoga is a great way to get out of that backache. Yeah, yoga it is. What is something that you're proud of but is not on your social media?
Honestly, yoga isn't on my social media really, but
actually, yeah, that's the one thing that's actually not on your social media.
That's one thing, and 2, I really love cooking, so I love recreating like my old family recipes and like kind of getting my mom to kind of write those down. So I think that's super fun. Yoga as a service.
Oh, I love this. It says, yes, yoga as a service. That's a great one, Mark. The final question for you. What's your favorite cuisine? Well, it's great segue as well. What's your favorite cuisine or restaurant that you can share?
My favorite cuisine is, again, back to my roots, I love Indian food. I don't think that you get like that, like depth of flavor and spice. Or maybe it's just because I grew up with it, but
yep.
I think Indian food's super, super interesting and like very extensible.
Nice. And especially if you have like access to family recipes as well, that probably is a great one. Great way to experiment.
Yeah.
So people who are in lockdown, they can definitely reach out for some traditional Indian family recipes to you, I guess, as well.
Oh,
Outside of the whole security architect as well. Cool.
yeah, it's good.
Awesome. All right. So this is kind of like towards the end of the show as well. So where can people find you if they want to reach out for if they have more questions about the whole cloud security architect thing, what kind of skills they need, and how maybe any follow-up questions they might have? Where can they reach you?
Sure, yeah. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Probably LinkedIn is the place where I'm, kind of most responsive. You can find me on Twitter too. Not super active there, but you can reach out to me there as well.
Awesome. Yeah, Twitter is an interesting one. If like depending on how, I'm not gonna go into this. This is gonna be a long episode if you're gonna go down the Twitter rant part. I can be like a online Twitter rant. But thank you so much for coming in, and thank you for all the audience members as well. Great questions. I'll definitely encourage you to reach out to others who are in the guest space as well as to Sriya as well if you have any questions. But cloud security is a great space. Just saying, it's amazing that so many people are interested, and so many people reached out as well to talk about how to become a cloud security architect. So, cybersecurity is interesting, but cloud security is definitely up there in making it more exciting. So, and you have people like Sriya as well who are making this feel exciting. Adding yoga elements into this, the yoga as a service element. So thanks, Mark, for that one. But thanks so much for this, Sriya. I really appreciate you coming on the show and spending time with us. Made my job so much easier that you were here to answer all the questions. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to bringing you back again.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashish. This was so much fun. And thank you to the audience. These, it was really fun questions to answer, and it's cool to interact. So yeah, and I hope everyone has a happy new year.
Oh, yes. Happy New Year and Happy New Year to you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.